Every night at midnight, the same dragon woman came to weep at her husband's memorial. And every night for 3 years, Jake pretended not to notice until tonight. Jake Thompson had a routine down pat, like clockwork. The war memorial was quiet after dark, save for his broom and bucket shuffling through the halls. Tonight wasn't different except that he couldn't shake off an eerie sense of being watched as he cleaned around Kethnar's statue. It was silly this place hadn't seen much activity since its opening over a century ago. The only one who ever visited, Lady Vexera herself, would not break her solemn silence to stare. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling tonight when she sat down for what seemed like the 100th time in front of Kethnar's statue, a massive bronze figure standing guard on the memorial's main floor. He'd always been told by his co-workers to avoid her dragons mourning their fallen were best left alone, a universal rule that no one ever questioned. Tonight was different though. As Jake swept closer to where she sat in front of Kethnar's statue, he couldn't help but notice the slight tremble in her shoulders, and the way her head bowed low against the sorrow etched into every line on her face. The dragon woman's wings twitched with each sob that escaped between ragged breaths. Jake froze mid-sweep, his broom hanging uselessly by his side as he stared at Lady Vexera's grieving form. For 3 years, this ritual had played out nightly, and never once did Jake intrude or interrupt her tears. But tonight was different somehow. "Ma'am," he cleared his throat, hesitating only slightly before approaching the statue more closely. "Are you all right?" She looked up sharply at him, her amber eyes wide with shock and disbelief as she turned to face him for perhaps the first time in decades. "Why do you ask me that?" Jake shrugged gently, setting down his broom behind Kethnar's feet before reaching into a side pocket of his janitor's uniform for a small handkerchief, a relic from days when people actually carried them as part of everyday etiquette. Offering it without thinking, he spoke softly but sincerely. "Because you're sad," Jake explained simply, "and no one should be alone with their sadness." Her mouth opened to speak, then closed again, the words seeming to get stuck somewhere deep in her throat. It was clear she hadn't expected anyone to acknowledge or question her state of mourning. "Thank you, but why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loud might shatter something inside herself that had long ago fallen apart. Jake's heart went out to the dragon woman despite himself. He knew better than most what it felt like to carry an unending burden of loss and responsibility alone. "No reason," he admitted honestly, meeting her eyes briefly before returning his gaze down at Kethnar's stone feet where she still held her handkerchief tightly between her claws. "Jake," he supplied when prompted by the silence that followed after their brief exchange. She nodded slowly, in return, amber eyes reflecting something more than just sorrow now. "I am Vexera," she whispered back softly before rising gracefully to leave as silently as she had come, before disappearing into the shadows of another hallway leading deeper into the memorial's recesses. Lady Vexera paused long enough for Jake's ears alone to catch her voice once more above the hushed quiet of their surroundings. "Thank you, Jake." As soon as he could no longer hear footsteps moving away down the hall, Jake leaned heavily against Kethnar's statue, letting out a breath he didn't know had been holding. It felt like an eternity before his mind registered that Lady Vexera had actually spoken to him. He hadn't just imagined it in this moment of strange happenstance where everything seemed to shift around him and yet remain exactly the same as ever since their initial encounter 3 years ago when she began appearing nightly at midnight without fail. His thoughts were interrupted by his comlink buzzing insistently against his belt, a reminder that closing time would be arriving soon. Jake shook off whatever odd energy lingered in his bones and went back to finishing up for the night. leaving Kethnar's statue behind as he swept further down the long corridor towards the exit. Little did either of them know then how this small act of kindness planted a seed that began to grow beyond what they could ever have predicted. Jake leaned against Kethnar's statue, his breathing steady and calm as he tried to process what had just unfolded between him and Lady Vexara. His hand rested on the smooth surface of her husband's memorial, feeling the cool stone under his fingers despite the warmth that still lingered in his chest from their brief exchange. He knew she wouldn't be back for another week. She always returned precisely every 7 days at midnight without fail. Jake had never dared to ask why such a specific schedule mattered so much until tonight, when it seemed like everything was about to change. The comlink buzzing against his belt pulled him sharply out of his reverie, reminding him that there were still tasks left for the night. With one last look back over at Kethnar's statue and a soft whisper under his breath, "See you in 7. Jake headed off towards the exit with renewed purpose. 7 days later came again, faster than Jake would have believed possible given all the other responsibilities that kept piling up around him. As soon as midnight ticked by on the memorial clock above one of the side entrances near Kethnar's statue, he was already there before she appeared, a habit forming naturally without even trying since their initial encounter. This time, when Lady Vexara stepped into view, her dark hair cascading down her shoulders and her robes whispering softly against polished marble floors as if carried by unseen wings of sorrow, Jake met her halfway across the room. He didn't need to wait for a nod or an invitation. Instinct took over instead. "Good evening," he greeted warmly this time rather than hesitatingly like last week. She paused mid-step towards Kethnar's statue at hearing his voice again so soon, turning fully around with guarded eyes that softened slightly upon recognizing him. "Hello, Jake." The sound of her saying his name felt strange yet oddly comforting in the quiet expanse of the memorial hall. It was as if acknowledging it made something solid between them start to grow. "Would you like some company today?" he asked tentatively, wondering what kind of reaction that might provoke from someone who had lived for 50 years in a world where being alone seemed second nature. Lady Vexara's gaze softened further before she nodded once. "Thank you," was all she said as her feet began moving again towards Kethnar's statue, allowing him to walk beside her silently down the corridor leading there. They arrived side by side beneath the towering form of bronze stone that represented everything Vexara had lost and mourned for so long without solace. She laid flowers at his base once more, just as she always did, but this time, instead of immediately dropping out of sight after placing them, Lady Vexara remained standing with her back turned to Jake. When he cleared his throat nervously, unsure if it was appropriate now even though they'd already exchanged words last week, she seemed to sense the hesitation and prompted gently, "Would you like to talk about him?" Her voice still held that soft tremor of sorrow, but also an underlying note of curiosity. Jake swallowed hard against a sudden wave of emotion at being asked such a personal question by someone had only encountered twice before tonight, yet felt inexplicably drawn towards despite every rational thought screaming caution. "Sure," was all he managed initially, stepping forward to stand next to her and looking up at Kethnar's stone face. "He sounds like quite the man," Jake said softly, after a moment of gathering thoughts around words meant only for Vexara's ears tonight. "To have earned your devotion like that must mean you found someone truly remarkable." Vexara sighed deeply, her shoulders rising and falling with unspoken pain before she turned to meet his gaze again. Those amber eyes filled once more with ancient grief, but also now shimmering slightly behind their usual veil of mourning. "Brave," Vexara whispered, as if the word was sacred, "always putting others first, even when there were times I wanted nothing more than him for myself." Her fingers traced along Kethnar's cold stone in a tender touch that seemed to speak volumes about the intimacy and depth of her feelings towards this man who had been both everything and nothing now. Jake nodded understandingly, remembering too well his own father's selflessness. "He was kind, wasn't he?" he asked quietly, thinking back on all the stories passed down through their family, about how Jake's dad always put others ahead of himself despite hardships faced alone. When young Jake had left for school early mornings before dawn, he wanted to protect everyone, Vexara continued in a barely audible murmur. Even after losing so much, Jake's heart tightened at those words, knowing too well what it felt like to lose someone irreplaceable, and how the burden of trying to fill their shoes could become almost overwhelming over time. He glanced back up towards Kethnar's statue for just a moment before turning fully toward Vexara again. "We all carry our burdens," Jake said softly, his voice steady despite everything else swirling inside him right now. She nodded slowly, as if considering this new perspective offered by someone so different from herself in every way, but perhaps more alike than she wanted to admit. "Yes, you do." And then something shifted subtly between them, breaking through some invisible barrier or built up over years of silent mourning. Jake felt it almost instantly, a small hand reaching out across an unspoken divide, and when he looked down at Vexara, again her eyes had changed somehow. "He's here," she murmured softly, now looking directly back into Jake's warm brown ones, without flinching away or hiding from the truth behind them, for perhaps the first time in decades. "Through you." Jake blinked, taken aback by such a direct acknowledgement of something so personal between them, but also strangely relieved that he wasn't alone anymore either when facing this kind stranger who'd shared her heart with him tonight. Their conversation flowed naturally, after that, moving beyond grief towards simpler things about everyday life and the small joys found within it, even during hard times. Jake told stories about his father's favorite foods, songs they used to listen together late at night while others slept peacefully, unaware of struggles faced by some families every day just trying to make ends meet. Vexara listened intently, sometimes smiling softly, though rarely laughing, as her rigid demeanor began slowly unwinding around him over time. It surprised them both how easily words started slipping out between each other now, rather than feeling forced or awkward after everything building up since their initial meeting. One night towards the end of his 7th day watching Vexara come back, Jake found himself leaning against Kethnar's statue again, as usual, waiting for her arrival. She appeared promptly, at midnight this time, almost seeming lighter on her feet now compared to those first few weeks when she had seemed weighed down by centuries' worth of sorrow alone. When they spoke tonight, it felt less formal, somehow more like two friends sharing stories over drinks or laughter rather than strangers grieving in separate corners, until brought together under one roof only recently. Jake had started bringing small snacks and music players filled with upbeat tunes he thought would help break up the somber atmosphere surrounding Vexara whenever she visited. Tonight was different, though something shifted again as soon as her eyes met his when entering. It wasn't just sorrow anymore, but also an opening of sorts, allowing glimpses deeper inside herself, where memories still held joy despite all else lost. "Jake," she began softly before pausing, taking a deep breath, as if gathering courage to ask what might feel foreign after so long. He noticed the change immediately and moved closer subconsciously. Yeah, she seemed conflicted for another moment, but then shook her head, almost imperceptibly, like dismissing thoughts not worth dwelling on further right now. Instead, Vexara looked up at him, clearly searching his face intently before finally speaking again with more certainty. "Would you like to see the memorial gardens after your shift?" Jake's heart skipped a beat, feeling both surprised and honored by this unexpected invitation, but also aware how strange it might seem given everything else already shared between them. Yet somehow none of that mattered anymore, as he simply nodded without hesitation, instead offering her his hand, something she took almost shyly but gratefully nonetheless. "Sure," was all Jake said back softly, squeezing gently to convey unspoken reassurances, before letting go again and turning towards the exit, where lights guided through corridors leading outside into open air, beyond walls of solemnity surrounding this place dedicated entirely toward remembering those who'd fallen in war long ago. "Jake, would you like to see the memorial gardens after your shift?" he agreed without hesitation. Jake's heart pounded as he walked through the quiet halls of the Galactic War Memorial, his janitorial equipment clanking at his side. It was unusual for him to be off duty so early in the morning, but Lady Vexara had invited him to visit her late husband's memorial gardens before anyone else arrived for work. The air seemed cooler and clearer now that the sun hadn't yet risen fully above the horizon. As he approached the entrance of Kethnar's section, Jake could already smell the scent of blooming flower, something that always made his mother smile when she talked about her own garden back home on Earth. "Lady Vexara," Jake called out as soon as he spotted her standing quietly by a row of tall shrubs. She turned at the sound of his voice, and for just an instant her eyes softened in welcome before they returned to their usual distant sadness. "Jake," her tone was low, but held a warmth that hadn't been there during their first meetings when she seemed so lost in mourning. "Come this way." They walked along winding paths lined with statues of fallen warriors from different species across the galaxy, each one telling its own story through engravings on stone and plaques. Vexara led him to a secluded part of the garden, where sunlight filtered through leafy canopies, creating dappled patterns on faded blue tiles. "These are my husband's favorite," she said gently, pointing out several types of flowers that bloomed in clusters around them, crimson roses mixed with lavender and white blooms. He loved how they looked when all together, but also appreciated each individual plant. Jake knelt down beside her to look closely at the plants growing amidst cracks and crevices between stones where water pooled, creating small ecosystems within this grand memorial space meant for remembering loss rather than life. "Beautiful," he murmured, his hand brushing against a delicate petal. "And they've stayed here all these years?" Vexara nodded solemnly, reaching out to touch one of the blooms carefully, as if afraid it might disappear before her eyes, like so many other things had over time since Kethnar's passing 50 years ago. "Yes," she said softly, more to herself than him. "They are resilient." Jake straightened up and glanced around at how peaceful everything looked now compared to earlier visits, where the place felt heavy with sorrow and history weighing down each step he took here alone after hours spent cleaning floors elsewhere in the memorial building. "Does it ever get easier?" Jake asked tentatively, wondering aloud about her decades-long journey through grief without knowing if there was an answer she could give at all anymore. The waiting, her gaze met his briefly, but lingered longer than usual now as they stood side by side, looking out across the garden's serene beauty. "It's not something that ends," Vexara admitted quietly, her voice almost breaking with emotion, even after so long without outward expression of it around others who didn't truly understand. It shifts. She turned back towards him then, amber eyes searching his face, as if trying to gauge where she stood with this human janitor who had started showing up day and night just to be near during her visits. Jake noticed too how she kept glancing over her shoulder nervously, every few moments now, though there wasn't anyone else around for miles in any direction. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked, his own guard rising slightly when seeing such a change from before. Vexera's lips quirked into what could only be described as a sad smile tinged with bitterness. "Tomorrow is 50 years since Kethnar died," she explained softly but clearly. "By tradition, my nephew Kyreth may now claim me." Jake's eyes widened in shock, his mind racing to comprehend the implications of such an ancient custom still holding power over lives so long after its original purpose might have faded away with time. "That's not a marriage," he blurted out harshly. "That's ownership." For once since they'd begun talking regularly, Vexera actually laughed at a sound filled with sorrow, but also unexpected humor given what was about to happen tomorrow. According to tradition, she couldn't escape no matter how hard it pained her soul. "You understand more than most dragons do," she said gently yet without bitterness. "Thank you for seeing that." Jake felt a pang of sympathy mixed heavily within his own frustration and anger toward this unjust practice being forced upon someone who clearly deserved better after decades lost to mourning alone with no comfort from outside world except him now apparently. "Can't we change it?" he asked desperately, hoping against hope, even though she knew the answer, already written in stone by centuries-long laws of her people, not easily overturned overnight. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as if acknowledging defeat long ago accepted but never truly embraced until facing reality today once again. "Tradition is law," Vexera reiterated softly before turning away and taking a deep breath to steady herself against the weight of what tomorrow would bring despite everything she had hoped might change through Jake's presence here recently. "I invited you because I wanted someone with whom these days could feel less lonely," she admitted finally, almost shyly, as if admitting weakness in front of him was difficult but necessary. "Someone who listens when others don't." Jake's heart ached hearing this confession from her lips. It felt like so much more than just an invitation to dinner now, given the gravity behind tomorrow's events, threatening everything she held dear since losing Kethnar. "Lady Vexera," he started hesitantly, feeling unsure of what words might offer solace, but wanting desperately still. "Would you want me there?" She paused mid-step, then turned back towards him with a small smile curving her lips, despite all sadness lingering underneath visibly in every line and shadow around those eyes. "Perhaps," she said softly, after a moment's consideration, meeting his gaze steadily, again without flinching away from truth now shared between them. "I think I do need it." And then came the invitation he had hoped for but didn't dare voice, yet feared might be too much to ask given everything else unfolding around her. "Dinner at my estate," she continued softly, glancing down briefly before meeting his eyes again firmly this time. "Tomorrow evening perhaps, if you're willing." Jake's heart fluttered. Why? A mix of happiness and dread intertwined tightly together like these gardens they walked through right now, filled equally with life, continuing even amidst so much loss and sorrow remembered here daily by countless beings across the galaxy. "I love that," he said simply, meaning every word deeply within him, where no one else seemed to reach, except maybe this woman who had lost everything yet still found light shining dimly between cracks in her armor now worn thin after 50 years alone fighting against encroaching darkness threatening again to consume what little peace she thought she might find among roses and lavender here. Her smile grew more genuine then, almost blinding against backdrop of dawn breaking finally above horizon, casting first beams into memorial gardens where life still bloomed amidst remembered death and heroism. Tomorrow evening then, Vexara reiterated softly, but with clear decision now made regarding both what was coming soon tomorrow as well as her hopes for tonight's dinner together, despite everything stacked against such possibilities given customs dictating otherwise. Until then, Jake. He nodded solemnly in response, his hand reaching out without thought to touch hers lightly, nothing more than a gesture meant perhaps more for himself right now, needing reassurance that someone understood, even if they couldn't change fate itself looming large upon horizon, weighing just beyond reach, yet still felt presence hovering heavily amidst fragrances blooming between them here today. Until then, and with those last words spoken softly back to her, Jake turned away, leaving behind Vexara standing alone once again among memorials dedicated towards fallen heroes, despite life itself now finding its way into spaces meant solely for remembering what was lost long ago until today. Jake stood nervously at the towering gates of Lady Vexara's estate, his hand hovering over the intricate patterned knocker that resembled a delicate dragon's wing in bronze relief. The sky was still streaking with dusky pinks and oranges as evening settled into the gardens around him. He could hear the distant rustle of leaves, but no sign of life beyond nature itself greeted his arrival. Taking a deep breath, Jake lifted the knocker and let it drop gently against the solid metal frame beneath, its soft chime echoing in sharp contrast to the silent stillness that enveloped everything else within sight. Moments ticked by as he waited anxiously for an answer, each second stretching into a lifetime of anticipation, before finally hearing the subtle creaking of hinges announcing movement somewhere inside. The massive oak door swung inward slowly, revealing Vexara standing in the threshold, her gaze softening at his approach with nothing but respect and kindness mirrored back towards him. Despite their differences in status and circumstance, something unspoken seemed to bind them together tighter than any formal invitation ever could have done alone under ordinary circumstances. "Jake," she greeted quietly, without fanfare or grandeur befitting her station, more typically expected from someone of such significance within the galactic community at large. "Please come inside." He hesitated for just a moment longer before stepping across the threshold into her home, eyes taking in every detail that passed him by as he made his way deeper through entryway hallways bathed softly under ambient lighting glowing warmly but dimly overhead. The place was massive and beautiful, every room exquisitely crafted to showcase relics of days long past when Kethnar lived and thrived among their kind, now faded into memory like echoes fading away over time. "Lady Vexara," Jake began awkwardly once they reached an open living area centered around a grand dining table set with two places already prepared for what felt more intimate than formal gathering between strangers, despite all protocol normally dictating otherwise in dealings between beings of such disparate standing within hierarchy and power dynamics governing their society at large. Her smile was gentle, but held no false pretenses about joyfulness lost long ago to fate's cruel hand, dealt out 50 years back, when life itself seemed yanked away far too early from warrior who had led countless battles against encroaching darkness, threatening galactic peace throughout regions under her species' dominion. Now, only sorrow lingered within every corner of this home built originally around love, but transformed now into place where mourning remained sole constant despite passing decades since tragic loss struck hardest. "Jake," she began softly, as if continuing thread from earlier conversation that had ended outside before doors closed between them, temporarily separating worlds momentarily, until current moment reunited two souls once more in unexpected way. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" He met her gaze steadily, without flinching away, under weight of such question pressed so heavily upon him already. Despite little time passed since invitation first extended towards evening, now drawing closer swiftly by minute after minute ticking past. I don't know if ready is the right word," he admitted honestly, shaking his head slightly in admission of truth that remained stark reality between them, regardless how much either wished otherwise, could be altered easily overnight. "Neither am I," she confessed quietly, with uncharacteristic openness bordering on vulnerability rarely seen from one so used to maintaining facade of stoic grace amongst peers and visitors alike who came seeking solace or guidance through stories preserved within these walls, dedicated solely towards honoring fallen hero long gone, yet never forgotten by those left behind in wake his absence. Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of her words without needing explicit explanation laid bare before him. It was a shared burden they both bore, that threatened to consume everything else if not faced head-on with courage and resolve born from love found unexpectedly. Amidst mourning's perpetual grip upon life, still lived beyond death's finality despite all appearances suggesting otherwise. "Is there anything I can do today?" Jake asked earnestly, wondering what might ease her pain even slightly before tomorrow's confrontation brought by forces outside their control. Vexera looked at him for a long moment, amber eyes searching his face as if seeking not just words, but something deeper buried within depths of sincerity and compassion shining brightly back towards her through connection forged between them over recent days, despite vast chasms separating worlds they hailed from originally. "Thank you," she said finally, with genuine appreciation radiating warmly, amidst lingering shadows of grief still clinging tightly around both their hearts. She led him further into the heart of a state, rooms filled to brim with remnants from Kethnar's re-ancient bronze armor polished until gleaming beneath ambient lights, casting long shadows upon walls adorned with paintings depicting epic battles fought side by side under banner that united all against common enemy threatening existence itself across galaxy at large. Yet here, amidst triumphs recorded through art and memorabilia, something changed subtly in atmosphere, shifting from cold reverence towards warm remembrance, tinged lightly but noticeably now with emotion unburied, long since buried beneath layers of mourning's relentless onslaught. "Please have a seat," she invited softly, motioning towards table already set, waiting silently between them like witness to shared intimacy built despite overwhelming odds standing against possibility, such moment ever occurring amidst tradition dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries leading up until now, when everything felt poised, delicately balanced upon edge of change, yet again threatening stability, hinged, precariously tenuous by forces beyond control or understanding easily grasped. Jake sat obediently, eyes tracing pattern design etched into tabletop and edges that seemed almost to sing with echoes of conversations held here long ago, before only silence had remained since loss struck hardest. "You made this?" he asked quietly, breaking awkward tension settled over table momentarily between them, until she answered affirmatively with a nod. "Yes," Vexera admitted softly but proudly, I haven't prepared food in 50 years. The admission felt like opening floodgates long sealed shut against waves of emotion building up behind dam constructed out of sorrow alone, threatening to overwhelm both now, if not allowed release, through sharing vulnerability, so seldom seen from one carrying mantle of mourning widow for decades on end. Jake's heart ached seeing her struggle openly, amidst memories that haunted halls and corridors winding throughout this grand estate built originally around love, but transformed now into place where grief still lingered despite time passing ever onward relentlessly beyond control. "You don't have to do this," he said gently, reaching out hesitantly towards hand resting near edge of table, as if seeking comfort from touch so rarely experienced amidst rigid traditions dictating otherwise. "I want to though," she replied with surprising strength in her voice despite words carrying weight of truth buried deeply within depths of sorrow still lingering heavily around both their hearts. "I need this to remember him not just through mourning, but fond memories too." Silence settled between them briefly as dinner was served silently on plates set before each of them, steaming bowls filled with dishes neither had ever tasted yet somehow felt familiar, like old friend meeting again after long absence despite everything changing drastically since paths last crossed under different circumstances entirely. They ate slowly together in comfortable silence initially, until Vexara broke it softly, glancing towards him over rim of her bowl still cradled gently between hands. "Tell me about your world," she requested kindly, seeking glimpse into life lived beyond confines dictated by status and title alone imposed upon shoulders carrying mantle far heavier than anyone would ever know truly, unless experiencing firsthand. Jake smiled warmly in response, eyes lighting up with genuine joy despite circumstances surrounding evening unfolding around them, both now intertwined under shadow of tomorrow's looming confrontation. "It's simple," he began hesitantly but truthfully, knowing she deserved nothing less from one who had opened themselves so completely before him already without flinching back against weight bearing down heavily upon fragile balance teetering delicately between worlds. Over plates emptied gradually, amidst conversation flowing easily through topics ranging widely yet connecting deeply beneath surface of casual chit at Vexara learned about Jake's past and present far more intimately than anyone else had ever managed within 50 years, each word painting vivid picture full of life lived fully despite challenges faced head-on, with resolve born from love found unexpectedly amidst mourning's perpetual grip upon existence, still endured beyond death's finality. "Do you remember what it was like to laugh?" she asked, suddenly breaking through veil built out necessity, but crumbling now under weight of shared intimacy forged between them over recent days against overwhelming odds, threatening stability hinged precariously tenuous by forces outside control or understanding easily grasped amidst layers sorrow and tradition dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries leading up until present moment. Jake looked at her, his eyes widening slightly in surprise before softening with warmth filling gaze, as if remembering laughter long since forgotten but still lingering faintly within depths, soul once more awakened under touch of unexpected connection built despite overwhelming odds standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries leading up until present moment. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I remember." He chuckled softly then, eyes crinkling at corners with genuine joy still lingering faintly within depths soul once more awakened under touch of unexpected connection built despite overwhelming odds, standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions, dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. Vexera watched him closely, her own lips curving upwards, slightly, in an almost smile, as if remembering laughter long since forgotten, but still lingering faintly within depths, soul once more awakened under touch of unexpected connection built despite overwhelming odds, standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions, dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. Me too, she admitted softly, reaching out to take his hand gently between hers, as if seeking comfort from touch so rarely experienced amidst rigid traditions, dictating otherwise. I've been existing these past 50 years but not living. Jake squeezed her hand back reassuringly, without hesitation or reservation, despite vast chasms separating worlds they hailed from originally, under circumstances far different than present moment now shared together amidst fragile balance, teetering delicately between forces beyond control yet somehow still within reach, through connection forged openly between them over recent days, against overwhelming odds, standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions, dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. What would make you live again? He asked gently, eyes searching hers intently for answer buried deeply beneath layers sorrow and tradition long since built around heart, still lingering faintly within depths, soul once more awakened under touch of unexpected connection forged despite overwhelming odds, standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions, dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. She looked at him then, amber eyes meeting his gaze steadily, without flinching away, underway truth shared openly between them now beyond mere surface level conversation or casual encounter built simply out necessity, but something far more profound and deeply rooted beneath layers sorrow and tradition, dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. Someone who sees me, she admitted softly, after long pause, allowing silence to settle heavily around both of their hearts amidst fragile balance, teetering delicately under forces beyond control yet somehow still within reach, through connection forged openly between them over recent days, against overwhelming odds, standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions, dictating otherwise, so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. Not the widow, not the title, just me. Jake's heart ached hearing this confession from her lips. It felt like everything she had held on to for 50 years was shifting, and he couldn't bear to think of what tomorrow might take away. Yet there was also something hopeful in her words, a glimmer of light peeking through the cracks in her armor worn thin after decades alone, fighting against encroaching darkness, threatening again to consume what little peace she thought she might find among roses and lavender here. Is there someone like that? He asked gently, reaching out to take her hand once more, without hesitation or reservation, despite vast chasms separating worlds they hailed from originally, under circumstances far different than present moment now shared together amidst fragile balance, teetering delicately between forces beyond control yet somehow still within reach, through connection forged openly between them over recent days, against overwhelming odds, standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions, dictating otherwise so rigidly enforced throughout centuries, leading up until present moment. She paused for a long moment, her hand tightening around his in an almost desperate grasp. "There isn't," she admitted softly, eyes searching his face as if seeking solace and understanding from someone who truly saw beyond the layers of sorrow she had built up over decades, alone fighting against encroaching darkness, threatening again to consume what little peace she thought she might find among roses and lavender here. Jake's heart ached hearing this confession from her lips. It felt like everything she had held on to for 50 years was shifting. And he couldn't know spoilers. Jake was wiping down one of the memorial statues when he heard a commotion outside the main entrance hall of the Galactic War Memorial. He paused, half listening, until a loud, arrogant laugh cut through the air like a knife. That wasn't Kyrath. The Dragon Warlord's claimant had arrived sooner than expected. Jake dropped his cleaning supplies and rushed out to meet him, heart pounding in his chest as he saw Lady Vexara standing alone by her husband's memorial statue. Her robes were black from head to toe, the same color that swallowed up the light of hope she used to carry decades ago, before it was stolen away by tragedy. Kyrath strode in with an air of superiority, flanked by a group of witnesses and lawyers who seemed just as smug about their presence here. Jake's stomach churned at the sight. These dragons were ready for war, but against Lady Vexara's dignity rather than anything physical or noble. "Ah, there she is," Kyrath drawled with that same condescending smirk. "The great widow of Warlord Kethnar. How fitting you'd hide behind your husband's shadow yet again." Lady Vexara didn't rise to his baiting. Her posture remained straight and dignified as always, but Jake saw a flicker in her amber eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. Kyrath noticed it too. "Oh, still mourning after all these years?" He chuckled deeply, looking around at the other dragons present for their amusement. "I'm sure you have your little pet here to keep things interesting," he added with a sneer towards Jake, who bristled instantly. "She's not property," Jake said firmly, stepping forward despite the unease rising in his gut. "You're talking about Lady Vexara." Kyrath's eyes narrowed into slits as if trying to decide whether or not to test just how much this human would dare stand up for someone like her. With a dismissive wave of his hand and a curt nod at the witnesses, he took another step towards Jake and struck him. Jake felt the back hand across his face before he could even react. His vision swam momentarily as he stumbled backwards against one of the walls lining Kyrath's path to Lady Vexara. Vexara let out an anguished cry and rushed forward, catching hold of Jake as she pulled him away from where Kyrath stood watching with an amused sneer on his face. Her hands were gentle yet firm around his shoulders, her eyes blazing up at the Dragon Warlord who dared to lay a finger on someone in this sacred place. "Touch him again and tradition be damned." Vexara's voice was low but filled with seething heat as she looked back up at Kyrath. "I will burn you." Kyrath laughed, stepping closer towards her now that he knew how far he could push without real consequences under the Draconic Council's approval. "You think you can stop it?" He took another step forward so they were almost nose to nose in this moment of intense tension. Lady Vexara's eyes flickered from red-hot fury down into a deeper despair, her gaze returning downward towards Jake, who was holding on tightly to the back of her mourning black robe, trying to steady himself and not let go for fear she would face something even worse alone. "Council has already approved your union," Kyrath continued with mocking indifference. "You have until sunset tonight to prepare." With that pronouncement hanging heavily in the air between them all, he turned on his heel and left without another word. Jake could feel the tremors running through Lady Vexara's body, even before she pulled away from him slightly enough so they were standing side by side instead of clinging together. She was shaking with rage and sorrow alike mixed tightly within her chest, where no amount of mourning attire or traditional devotion could ever hide such pain anymore. "Vex," he began, wanting to say something more supportive, but knowing any platitudes would only fall flat under the weight of this impossible situation she faced now, being forced upon them both by those who held power over their lives, despite everything about it feeling so wrong and unfair for everyone involved. "There has to be another way," Jake said instead, with resolve tightening around his heart like a fist. "I can't let things stay as they are, not anymore." She looked at him then, amber eyes meeting his gaze steadily, without flinching away under the weight of what was coming next, or the truth shared openly between them now beyond mere surface level conversation built simply out necessity, but something far more profound and deeply rooted beneath layers sorrow and forced rigidly through centuries leading up until present moment. "There is one," she admitted softly, after a long pause, allowing silence to settle heavily around both their hearts amidst fragile balance, teetering delicately under forces beyond control yet somehow still within reach, through connection forged openly between them over recent days, against overwhelming odds standing against possibility, such thing ever occurring amidst traditions dictating otherwise so rigidly enforced throughout centuries leading up until present moment. "But it's impossible." Jake nodded slowly, catching her gaze and seeing the glimmer of something flickering back into those sorrow-filled eyes. He had to believe that was there somehow, if they were truly going to stand a chance against what was coming next. "A widow can only reject a claim," Lady Vexara continued softly, "if she's already bonded to another." Jake felt his heart leap unexpectedly at the possibility laid out before them both in those words, and all their implications. For everything this could mean, not just for him, but also her breaking free from chains that had held her back so long. It was worth trying anything now, even if it meant facing dragons on a path never taken by any of its kind. "And dragons don't bond with humans," she finished softly, looking down at the floor as though afraid to meet his eyes once more, knowing full well what he might see there reflected back from someone who truly understood her far better than anyone else ever had in so very long now. "Then let's find out if they can," Jake said simply, standing up straight and meeting those amber eyes with an unwavering gaze of determination burning brightly within him instead. Together, Lady Vexara looked at him then, hope sparking anew behind her sorrowful gaze, as she realized there might indeed be a path forward after all, despite everything that seemed to stand against it now. She took his hand gently in hers, without hesitation, and met his determined look head on, amber eyes shining brightly with the faintest flicker of warmth amidst shadows long held back by grief. "Let's do this," she agreed softly but firmly, as they turned away from Kyreth's smirking form to face whatever awaited them next together. "Andy," she looks at him, "there is one, but it's impossible." He stands. "Then let's find out if they can." Lady Vexara and Jake stood at the edge of a bustling marketplace, the sun high in the sky casting long shadows across their path as they hurried toward their destination. The air was thick with the sounds of alien voices intermingling with human whispers, and the distant clinking of metal against stone, a symphony that played out daily within this galactic city. "We don't have much time," Lady Vexara said, her voice a whisper but firm as she led Jake through narrow alleyways. Her robes fluttered slightly in the breeze, black fabric catching every eye and drawing gazes that lingered far too long on their mourning figure before swiftly looking away in respect or perhaps fear. Jake kept pace beside her, his eyes scanning their surroundings with a mixture of determination and unease. "I know," he said, glancing back to see Kyreth's imposing form still visible through the throngs of people they had just left behind, his smug smile etched into stone, as if daring them to challenge him. They moved swiftly now, weaving between stalls filled with exotic foods Jake couldn't even name and colorful fabrics that caught his eye, but he didn't have time to admire. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the stakes they were about to face. A wrong move could mean losing everything they had come to care for. The Galactic War Memorial loomed before them. As they approached its grand entrance, a towering structure adorned with countless statues and carvings honoring fallen heroes from across galaxies. But today, it was not just an honorific site, but a battlefield where tradition clashed head-on with the possibility of change. "Almost there," Jake murmured, his hand brushing against Vexara's as they hurried up to the entrance. The cold stone beneath their feet felt like an anchor tying them down despite the rush to get inside and claim what might just be possible for them both now. The doors were ornate but heavy, each one a testament to the strength of those who had built this place in honor of fallen warriors. Jake pushed it open with all his might, Vexara following closely behind him as they stepped into another world entirely, a grand hall filled with marble statues and intricate carvings depicting battles long past. At the far end stood the Dragon Council, a council made up of ancient dragon figures who ruled with both wisdom and ironclad traditions. Kyreth was there already, his smirking form lounging against one of the pillars, as if he owned this place himself, a fitting symbol for everything that had kept Lady Vexara trapped in her sorrow all these years. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward without hesitation. "I challenge the claim," he declared loudly enough to be heard by everyone present, including Kyreth, who sneered openly at such audacity from one so lowly as Jake. The council laughed at a hollow sound that filled the grand hall with echoes of disbelief mixed with disdain for this human's foolishness in challenging a dragon. But Kyreth was not amused. He snorted and said mockingly, "A human? You think you can challenge me?" Jake stood tall despite everything weighing on him, odds against them being as insurmountable as the ancient laws keeping Lady Vexara bound by tradition alone to this place forevermore. But he would not back down now. Too much was at stake for either of them if they failed here. "I invoke the right of heart bond," Jake declared, his voice steady despite the tremor running through him from head to toe as every eye turned towards Lady Vexara, who had moved to stand beside him. "Lady Vexara has chosen me." Silence fell over the hall, then even Kyreth's smirk faded slightly under the weight of what was being claimed here, a bond between a human and dragon that had never been known before, let alone considered possible. The head counselor looked towards Lady Vexara expectantly. "Is this true?" he asked formally, but with an underlying edge to his tone hinting at skepticism despite their ancient laws stating otherwise about such unions ever occurring naturally without force involved against one's will, like Kyreth's claim was doing now, essentially trying to seize her in marriage as if she were property or prize, instead of being able freely choose herself what path forward meant for them both together. Lady Vexara stepped closer to Jake, taking his hand gently but firmly within hers, a gesture that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. She looked into the counselor's eyes steadily then, and said quietly yet with a strength that carried through even this grand hall, Kethnar taught me that love has no species. This human has shown me more respect, more kindness, more genuine care in weeks than any dragon has in 50 years. Her words hit Kyreth hard. Where it mattered most, his smug expression twisted into one of pure fury, as he realized this challenge was not just against him, but everything the council and himself had upheld for so long without question or thought ever given towards changing status quo, despite how much suffering resulted from rigid adherence to such beliefs instead. "And I choose him," Lady Vexara concluded softly yet firmly, her gaze never wavering even as murmurs broke out around them. The council was in a porno dragon had ever bonded with a human before, and the ancient laws did indeed state that no claim could supersede it once hearts were truly joined regardless of species or station in life. Karath lunged forward then, his fangs bared, but he faltered at the sight of Jake standing tall beside Lady Vexara. He snarled loudly instead, but there was nothing else left for him to do now. Tradition and law stood against him here as surely as stone walls around them all did too. The head counselor stepped forward then, his expression serious despite the shock evident in those amber eyes of every other dragon present, who looked on with wide-eyed wonder at what they were witnessing being played out before their very own shocked senses. "Now indeed, by ancient law," he said formally, but without hesitation or delay, "if both hearts are willing and truly joined, then no claim can stand against them. They will bond here today under our rights, as any other wood-dragon fire and human vows intertwine." Jake felt a rush of warmth spread through him at those words, even while Kyreth's rage boiled around them like an angry tempest threatening to break loose and destroy everything they had managed to build together so far already. "Thank you," he whispered softly towards Lady Vexara then, his eyes shining brightly, amidst the turmoil brewing all around them now, as if it didn't matter at all compared with what mattered most here between just these two figures finally finding freedom after decades of sorrow imposed upon her life by society's rigid expectations and outdated customs instead. Vexara smiled softly back in return, her first real smile Jake had ever seen, on those warm amber eyes that seemed to shine through the shadows long held back until now. "Let's do this," she agreed simply, but with all their hearts set firmly together, as they turned away from Kyreth's furious form still seething and sputtering angrily behind them now. Years later, Jake maintained Kethnar's memorial personnel, cleaning every inch of it daily, out of respect not just for the warlord who had given Vexara life beyond mere existence, but also understanding why she felt so strongly about honoring him despite everything too. Because in doing this together day after day, amidst all that had transpired, Jake understood both sides now better than anyone else ever could. Indeed, together they stood before Kethnar's statue once more, their bond stronger with each passing year, his love giving her life again beyond mere existence, while hers honoring his memory, still deeply cherished amidst newfound happiness brought into being by someone who cared enough to challenge everything she had ever known was possible for dragons and humans alike. And both were worth honoring indeed.